Cool. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. My name's Justin. I am, as I said, head of marketing at BetJets. BetJets, we are a South African betting operator. And just over the last few months, well, several months, we've started to use Optimove's Gamify product. The mini games from Gamify to essentially sort of gamify our customer experience, basically. We started to sort of incorporate this through quite a few of our sort of life cycle marketing campaigns. And today I'm going to basically take you through a sort of real practical use case of how we're using Gamify to essentially convert dormant non-depositors customers into actual depositing customers. So a few months ago, I think this was back in November last year, we ran a small test with a group of non-depositing customers with a gamified campaign, so like a simple mini game type campaign. And what we did here, we essentially ran an A/B test. So we had a segment of customers. We split that in half. So half of them received a mini game campaign, and the other half received just a sort of a standard reminder of a welcome bonus, because these guys haven't taken up any sort of bonus yet. And what we saw during that test was ultimately the group that received the gamified campaign had a 3.5 times uplift in first-time deposits compared to the people who didn't receive any sort of gamification offer there. So what did that game actually look like? It was essentially this. It's just a game of Plinko. People had a chance to play this only once, so they could literally play the game once. There were 6 different prizes that they had a chance to win. The ball would essentially land on a game, or on a prize, sorry, and it would unlock a bonus, basically. The bonus will be shown as a bonus code, like that, and the customer could basically make a deposit on our website using that bonus code to claim it. So in this session, I'm going to basically show you why we did this, how we got there, and ultimately how you could do something similar in your own campaigns. So firstly, why this session? If you're here kind of in the sports betting industry or casino operating, you can maybe sort of relate to this a bit, where traffic and registrations is kind of almost the easy part in this process. Maybe you guys that's not your sort of responsibility, but ultimately on traffic, you can be working with more paid channels, working with more affiliate partners, improving your SEO. There's sort of various ways you can kind of improve your traffic. Registrations, kind of a similar thing, sort of comes down to your sign-up flow, your user experience. Maybe you've got like a free sign-up offer as like an extra incentive for people to sign up. So that's kind of the easy bit. The more difficult part is that first deposit, getting that first deposit, and then getting that sort of second, third, fourth deposits, that early retention to ultimately get that customer to become an active customer with you. So in this session, we're just going to sort of unpack one specific problem and the solution that we've used at BetJets for this challenge. Just a quick bit about me. Justin, my full name is Justin Sinclair Thompson. Bit of a mouthful, I know. I'm from Cape Town in South Africa, where right now I believe it's like 38 degrees and everyone's at the beach, I imagine. And yeah, I'm head of marketing at BetJets. I've been in this gaming space for the last sort of 8 years, starting out in lottery, then moving into sports betting and casino. And yeah, about 6 years of that time, I've been working hands-on on Optimove with the Optimove team. BetJets, as I said, we are a sports betting casino platform. We are only licensed to operate in the South African market, which has its own unique challenges. South African market is very much mobile first. We know that about 95% of our website traffic is on mobile. We also know in the South African market, only about 15% of households actually have Wi-Fi at home. Everyone's basically using mobile data on their phones. We also know South Africa's got some of the most expensive data in the world. So people are buying very small data bundles. They're very conscious about how they use their data and yeah, where they're using it, basically. BetJets, we're quite a new brand. We've only been operating for 1.5 years. So we're quite a relative newcomer on the block in South Africa there. So what is the problem we wanted to solve? Because we're kind of a new brand, maybe some of you guys have gone through this. When you're starting with working with Optimove, we've obviously had Optimove since we started. And when you're starting a brand new brand, you're starting naturally targeting your early life cycles. So you're looking at guys like your welcome journey, your new customer streams, your active customers, reactivated and then churn, and eventually you kind of get to dormant. Obviously on day one, you just don't have any dormant customers, basically. But we've kind of, since we've been doing that, we have ultimately started kind of getting this sort of expanding pool of these non-depositing customers. So guys who have registered, they've obviously received our sort of standard offers, but they still haven't deposited. So these customers, yeah, we've tried our traditional approaches. We've given them sort of bonus reminders, obviously SMS and sort of email nudges there. But ultimately, what we've done so far has been very limited there. Nothing's really quite working with this audience. They're still not quite converting. So this is where we kind of thought, like, how can we gamify this? What can we do with Optimove Gamify to create some sort of mini game experience here, to just try a different approach with this group. So this is where we started going down the road with gamification with this group. So why gamification? Just in practice, when we're talking about gamification, we're not talking about your traditional casino games. These are essentially mini games, games like scratch cards and trivia, Wheel of Fortune, sort of knowledge-based, skill-based, or sometimes just pure luck-based, basically, without any sort of skill or knowledge games. Each game is basically like a short challenge. They all have a clear sort of start and end, and ultimately it's like a challenge for the customer to complete this game. Each game also has clear progress. Depending on the game you're using, there might be sort of levels to it, or it's just a single level, where each game ultimately has like a clear start point and a clear end point. And through this process, the customer's obviously playing these games to unlock a reward, which will be a deposit bonus for them to go and play on our website. And because we're doing it this way, ultimately that reward feels earned for the customer. They feel like they actually deserve it, rather than us giving out the freebie to the customer. So there's a bit of a key shift in how we kind of communicate this, basically. We sort of move away from our sort of traditional messaging of just saying, like, hey, here's a bonus. We're now kind of saying, like, complete this to unlock that. So it's like a bit of a challenge to the customer, basically. So how does this work for non-depositing customers? Firstly, there's low commitment. These games are very quick. They can be played on any device. We're not asking for any money up front either. So and because we're not asking for money up front, the customer can play for free. So we're essentially sort of building a bit of momentum with this customer. They're interacting with our brand much more than they would have without this sort of experience. And because we're kind of building this momentum, ultimately we're sort of reducing that friction to the first deposit. So by the time they actually get to the step to make a deposit, it sort of feels earned at that point, basically. So through this, when you sort of think about it this way, essentially that first deposit, almost becomes the final step and not the first. So it's a bit of a different approach of how you sort of tackle these campaigns. So just the one use case we're focusing on today, the audience we're looking at here is just a segment of dormant non-depositors. In our Optimove instance, this is customers who've registered 6 months or more ago and have still made a deposit. Obviously, that configuration could be different in your instance, but for us, 6 months is a dormant non-depositor. Our goal here very much is just to drive first-time deposits, and the channels we use, Optimail for email, OptiText for SMSs, and web page pop-up is where we actually house the campaign. So just on the tools there, standard Optimove Orchestrate, the environment you're all familiar with. That's where we do our sort of targeting and orchestration. And then Optimove Gamify is where we actually create the whole gamified experience. So what does success look like for us? Our primary KPI was, of course, first-time deposit rate. And to measure this, we had to do an A/B test. So we essentially ran it in comparison against what we call a standard Optimove campaign, which for us, all that meant was just essentially a reminder of a welcome bonus that the customer hasn't taken up yet. So we had to run these two in parallel. We have a segment of people. Half of them are basically receiving a sort of gamified campaign, and the other half are just receiving a standard Optimove sort of reminder. And what we saw here ultimately is the group that received the gamified campaign had a 3.5 times uplift in first-time deposits compared to the group that did not. So again, just at a high sort of how we got there, at a very high level architecture. Orchestrate is where we do the sort of audience defining, creating the target groups, scheduling the campaigns. In Gamify is where we create the actual gamification mechanic for the minigame. It's also where we set up our reward logic. And then on BetJets, on our side, it was quite important to note here that there was no custom development involved. No engineers involved. This is something which a marketing team, pretty much anyone on our marketing team, could sort of execute this quite easily, which speaks to this whole theme of positionless marketing. You know, anyone on the team is essentially able to execute these campaigns on their own, basically. So I'm just going to take you through a bit of a quick demo of how we got there, essentially, how we sort of gamified this whole player journey. And it kind of comes down to these sort of 4 simple steps. So first we'll look at actually choosing the minigame template. We'll then look at customizing that campaign for our specific brand. We'll then configure the actual rewards logic. And then finally, we integrate that with Optimove for the campaign execution. So starting with step 1 there, choosing the Gamify template. When you log into Gamify, you see a page like this, basically, which will just show you all your current campaigns. And then when you click through to create a new campaign, you'll see all the different types of mini games you can choose from. There's dozens of games. They're all sort of filtered by categories. So you've got games like Wheel of Fortune, Plinko, scratch cards, open the box, personality tests, trivia, swipe polls, and a whole lot more there. We went with this game Plinko, which, if you're not familiar, is what I showed just now, but essentially a ball drops in the top, the customer drops the ball in, and it will drop down the pins and land on a section at the bottom. Each of those 6 sections is essentially associated with a prize, which will be a reward bonus on our website. Why did we use Plinko? Why did we use Plinko? It's just because it's a hugely popular game in South Africa. A lot of our competitors actually have betting on Plinko as a product. On our book, we didn't actually have Plinko as a betting product. So it was a nice way to bring this game in and sort of ride the sort of popularity that this game is having in South Africa at the moment. Cool, so now that we decided we're going with Plinko as a game, we then customize this game for our specific brand. So of course the way of customizing a campaign is very different depending on what campaign you're doing. You know, customizing a game of Plinko is very different to, say, setting up a personality quiz or a trivia type game. So with Plinko, there's 6 different sections at the bottom. Each one is ultimately associated with a prize. I'll get through the sort of reward logic shortly, but ultimately each of those sections we associate with a specific prize. We also customize the whole sort of page experience. So in other words, when you're sending traffic to the actual page, what do they see first? Are they going straight to the game of Plinko, or is it more like this where there's a start page? Start page, which the customer clicks through to actually get through to the game page and continue from there. On the start page, you can customize every aspect of it. You can see we just put a simple logo and a text heading there and a button, but you can add various widgets there. You can really tailor this to your specific brand. You can see we've done all those sections. We then customize the actual game page as well. So once they've clicked through from the start page, now they're on the sort of game page. And how do we sort of make that look? Firstly, in terms of the sizing of it, getting it right on mobile and desktop devices, for example, just to make sure it looks good everywhere. And then each prize screen as well. So once the customers unlock the prize, we can completely configure how the sort of prize screen appears, basically. So when we add prizes here, you can see I've added a few here already, but essentially each prize, when you're configuring a prize, there's quite a few sort of attributes you can configure with the prize. So of course things like giving it a title and a description, which can be displayed in the actual prize pop-up to the customer. You can also set your winning probability, which is quite an important tool to use here. Where what we often do is having, for example, having maybe one really exciting kind of reward bonus, which has a very low probability of winning. And then conversely, maybe having a few sort of smaller bonuses, which have a much higher chance of winning. You can also set how the prize is awarded. So is each customer getting the same bonus code, or maybe you're giving a different code to each customer? But that ultimately comes down to your sort of bonus engine and your configuration. You can also actually do this using real-time campaigns. So you can also have it where, because you receive real-time events when people play these games, you can actually have it where, for example, on game completion, you automatically trigger a real-time campaign which awards the bonus, and then you don't have to use any codes or anything like that. So once you've actually kind of set up the rewards there, we then look at how we can integrate this into Optimove, and there's a few ways you can do this. First, we publish the campaign. When you publish the campaign, you've then got a unique landing page URL, which you can obviously just drive traffic straight to that page. Of course, if you just got a floating landing page URL out there in the wild, it's a bit hard to control who's actually seeing that page. People could start sharing it on social media, and it gets a bit out of control. So we didn't really want to just have a page like that. We obviously wanted to embed this into an Optimove campaign. So there's a few ways we can do that. You can, depending on how much code you want to touch, basically. But ultimately, the easiest way is just to embed it as an iframe. If you embed it in an iframe, you'll just receive a little code snippet in here, and you're not touching the code. You're literally just copying and pasting the entire code and pasting it anywhere you can put HTML. So that's our little iframe code. So once we've got that code for our campaign, we literally copy it. And what we've done here, we just pasting it straight into a web page pop-up campaign. So here's just your standard web page pop-up editor. We just use the widget, the HTML widget. We can drop our iframe code right there, and then it renders right there already in the preview, so we can just see that the game's connected, it's working as expected. We can then go and publish our web page pop-up template, and then we can bring that into a campaign. Obviously, there's a few different ways you could do this, I think. I don't think it's necessarily a sort of right or wrong way, but we've done this ultimately through a stream with 2 different treatments. Like I said, the way for us to measure the uplift here, we needed to have a treatment where customers were not receiving this gamified campaign. They were just receiving a fairly standard email that was basically reminding them about a welcome bonus, which they still haven't taken up months later after signing up with us. So that's essentially how we sort of structured it. Obviously, to keep this test a fair sort of apples-to-apples comparison, we needed to make sure that the sort of communication was going out at the exact same time, the same day, same time for both of these channels, for both of these groups, so we could have a very fair comparison, when looking at the stream analysis. So if you think about how this sort of works from a player experience, firstly, the player will receive a message. They would receive an email and an SMS from us, essentially inviting them to come play Plinko for a chance to unlock an exclusive reward. Once they click through to our website, they log into their account, they then get the Optimove pop-up, and then from there, they're essentially entering this sort of gamified experience. Once they're in that experience, they have a clear reward visibility. With Plinko, they could clearly see the 6 different sections or prizes that they stand a chance to actually win here. And then once they've landed on a prize, we have a clear deposit call to action, encouraging the customer to go through to our website to actually use the bonus to make a deposit on our website. So what does this user experience convert? Ultimately, the reward feels unlocked here. The customer kind of feels like they've earned something. They've actually, had to complete a bit of a challenge here, and ultimately that deposit ends up feeling justified. So you're sort of relying less on free money. You're not just dishing out sort of free bonuses or free spins or free sports bets or whatever it is to try to get the customer, but you're rather giving them a challenge, and they're ultimately feeling like they're sort of successfully completing a challenge, and hence now their deposit is justified. So as a snapshot of our results, as I mentioned up front, we saw a 3.5 times increase in first-time deposits when we look at our gamified campaign measured against the control campaign. But besides that, we also saw a few other metrics: much higher engagement before deposit, customers are spending more time on our website, interacting with more pages on the website, and also a faster conversion window, going from when the customer received the campaign to when they actually made their first deposit. So how do we measure this? We use ultimately standard Optimove reporting. If you're familiar with the stream analysis, you can very quite easily see treatment A versus treatment B. Because we had the control group comparison, we were able to sort of do that essentially. So we could measure our control group against the test group. And there's also important to note here, there's a very short feedback loop. This really wasn't a long experiment. It was essentially a 2-week stream, and results came very quickly here. Once customers had gone through that stream, we could immediately see the results and the uplift from our gamified campaign. So what have we optimized post-launch? Obviously, just using gamification, it does make the whole optimization sort of faster and clearer. So there are a few aspects we could look at. We started looking at the reward values. So what specific rewards are these customers actually eligible to unlock here? Obviously, they're all deposit bonuses because we're ultimately trying to drive deposits here. So it would be deposit and get X percentage of casino bonus or a sports bonus or free spins or a free bet. So we've sort of been adjusting those values. And then our actual messaging copy as well. What are we actually putting in the SMSs and the emails that these customers are receiving when we're inviting them to come, challenging them to come play the game? We've also looked at our entry timing. So initially, this was actually just a once-off campaign. It wasn't like a recurring campaign or anything like that. It was a once-off stream. So everyone got sort of batch enrolled initially and went through it. Now that we've run that test, we've now got it on as like a recurring campaign. So customers will automatically start going into this campaign as soon as they meet the criteria. The next day, they ultimately begin the journey. So now we have different customers at different stages of the stream each day, whereas initially it was all just one big batch going through the whole journey. And then we've also looked at the campaign duration there. As I said, initially it was just once off, but now it's essentially always on. So every day there's kind of new customers who are starting this whole gamification journey with us. So why is gamification easy to optimize? Firstly, you've got clear visual engagement signals. You think about your typical CRM campaign, your engagement signals are sort of click-through rates, open rates, those kind of metrics. But on gamification, you're now looking at like game start rate, game completion rate, level completion rate. So you've got a few more sort of metrics and more signals to kind of look at here. Also, because gamification is very much step-based, each game essentially has a clear start and end, and depending on how you've done it, you've maybe got different levels to it as well. So you can see these sort of clear drop-off points of how far a customer got before they ultimately dropped off, whether that was just losing interest or for whatever reason, but you could ultimately see how far has someone progressed through your game. There's also just less guesswork here. Again, if you think about how would you optimize your standard CRM campaign, you're ultimately trying stuff like different subject line or different send times or different bonus, and you kind of just try those things and ultimately just sort of hope for the best. But now with when you're doing a gamified campaign, there's essentially less guesswork here because now you're getting a lot more sort of micro signals of game completion rate and game start rate and all these things. So now you're responding to the customer behavior. You're not just sort of taking a guess and hoping for the best, essentially. And you've also just got much faster learning cycles because you've got all these micro events coming through really fast. You can really make decisions quite quick here. You're not relying on more sort of data to come through because you're getting a whole lot of data coming through really quick as customers are playing these games. It's also, because it's sort of a no-code solution, it also means that the marketing team's very easy able to sort of adjust the games on the fly without requiring any sort of development work or development teams involved. Cool, so if I could just end off with a couple sort of key takeaways here from my approach of how we've done this. My approach is very much, my sort of suggestion here, is always to start these kind of gamified campaigns with just one high impact use case. It's much easier and quicker to test when you've got like a large audience that you can really sort of test quickly with, get results quickly, because ultimately you can apply those learnings to smaller customer segments, especially when you're getting very granular and some of your segments, it can be quite difficult to actually get like statistically significant results. So you kind of take your learnings from your larger segments and you can apply that to more granular segments as you go. My next sort of takeaway here is definitely that gamification works best before money is involved. So, don't try to get the customer to make a deposit for the chance to play the game. Rather, let the customer pay for free for a chance to then go and make a deposit. You could obviously do this in different ways, like that example I showed. Customers had a chance to play it once, but ultimately you could have a game where customers played once a day or a couple of times a day, or however you set it up. And the last sort of takeaway here is just using no-code tools like Optimove Gamify just means faster testing, faster iteration. Again, you're not relying on any sort of development teams. It's very quick and easy to sort of make changes on the fly while a campaign is live, essentially. So you can keep iterating, find what works, and keep adjusting from there. So where does this go next? Obviously looking, beyond the first deposit. Like in this example I've showed today was very much about driving that first deposit specifically, trying to get a non-depositing customer to become a depositing customer. But you can ultimately look at how can you gamify the experience on a second, third, fourth deposit, and through your sort of active segments. Also bringing gamification into your sort of standard retention loops. You might maybe have like weekly recurring campaigns that run on certain days, or each Tuesday, for example, those kind of campaigns. So trying to gamify that experience instead of just dishing out bonuses every Tuesday, for example, you're now sort of giving the customer a challenge for a chance to actually unlock a bonus. You can also do multi-step challenges. So again, with Plinko was quite a simple sort of single step, but you can sort of tee these games together as well, where they've got to complete one game for a chance to unlock another game, or you can have multiple levels in a certain game. So you can get a bit more intricate of how these challenges are actually set up. You can also use a sort of advent calendar style, where maybe each day the customer's got a chance to play one specific game, and they've got to complete that game to be eligible to play the next day, for example. So the next step is just personalization. Ultimately, in Optimove, I'm sure you all know, you've got a range of customer attributes that you can work with, or how you sort of segment your customer base. So you can create specific games for each sort of customer segment. In this example, we were just doing dormant non-depositors. Because those customers are dormant non-depositors, we don't have a huge amount of data points on them. We don't know, do they prefer casino games? Do they prefer sports? So we kind of had to treat them all the same. But ultimately, with your other customers, your sort of more active life cycle segments, you can be splitting by, for example, product preference. Are they a casino customer? Then do some sort of spin wheel type campaign. Or are they a sports customer? There may be a trivia type campaign works for them. So you can get very granular of setting up different campaigns for each of your sort of very sort of granular life cycle segments, basically. Just a final thought here. I know gamification is a bit of a hot topic almost, I guess you could say. There's always sort of talk around it, especially online at the moment in this industry. A lot of people kind of thinking, is it a bit of a gimmick type thing? Does it actually really sort of work, or is there any sort of value in doing these sort of mini game campaigns? And just to that, I would say, certainly isn't a gimmick. I think if you're actually executing the campaign properly, it can be really come a very strong conversion lever and really supports your deposit workflow. And yeah, thank you all, guys. Appreciate it. Yeah.